Get started, because we really want to get to the meat of this, and you don't want to see me standing up here and talking at you. So my name is Catherine Roberts. You can call me Katie. I'm the Resource Protection Division Director at the New Mexico Environment Department. So I oversee 4 different programs, one of which is Haz Waste Bureau, the other Oversight Bureau, Petroleum Storage Tanks, and the Solid Waste Bureau. So I basically have all of the waste programs. That's right. So we're very happy to be here tonight. I really want to give a big thank you to Janet Greenwald for really pushing for this meeting. She did some excellent recruiting to get you all out here, so we really appreciate your time. And actually, thank you to the sister for finding our space for us. We really appreciate that, so thank you. And you didn't have to drive all the way downtown. That's a good thing, too. So we have some introductions to do tonight. So I introduced myself, but there's actually quite a few of my folks, my staff, sitting throughout the room tonight. So I'm going to start with the panel really quickly. You have Dennis McQuillan, who's our Chief Scientist for the Environment Department. You see him a lot related to Kirtland. Brian Salem, who also works in Haz Waste Bureau, and he is one of the project leads for the Sandia National Laboratory. And we have Chris Armijo, who works for our DOE Oversight Bureau, and he is the project lead for Sandia. We also have our Communications Director, Allison Scott Major. So if you have media inquiry type questions, she's the lady to come see. Let's see, I'm going to call you out specifically, sorry guys. Michelle Hunter, our Groundwater Quality Bureau Chief, right here in the middle. Susan Lucas Kamat, who is our Bureau Chief for DOE Oversight Bureau. John Keeling, our Hazardous Waste Bureau Chief. And Diane Agnew up here, who's kind of operating slide presentations up here. She is one of our project leads in Haz Waste Bureau on the Kirtland Air Force Base fuel spill. And then Naomi Davidson, you're hiding back there, is also one of our project leads in Haz Waste Bureau for Sandia. So we also have quite a few staff members from Sandia and DOE here tonight. And I'm going to read this list off so I don't forget you, because I would hate to do that. So Joe Estrada is here in the back. And Anita, I think I saw you sneak in. There she is. Dave Rast, there he is. Dave Miller, are you here? Excellent. John Cochran, excellent, there he is. I thought I saw you sneak in. John Copland, there he is. June Lee, excellent. And Mike Skelly, I believe, yes. So they're going to be here to answer project-specific questions about each of the individual sites that we're talking about. So you have kind of higher-level management of Sandia, but also each of the project leads. So if there's a question we can't answer, they should be able to answer it. Where is Rick Sheehan? There he is. Okay, I knew you were here. So he is with the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. So there's quite a bit of overlap here. So there may be questions that come up related to his area. And last but certainly not least, if you need the restroom, they're right through there. Okay, just sneak behind here. Okay, Diane, can you advance a slide or two for me? Excellent. Okay, so we've really gone through most of the first 2 bullets here, but in terms of meeting structure, I wanted to explain that each of the presenters up here has about approximately a 10 to 15 minute presentation. Okay? What I'm going to ask is that you wait until the presenters have gone through their presentation. It should not take more than 45 minutes. And then we're going to have a very lengthy, hopefully hour and 15 minutes of a Q&A. So there are note cards in the back of the room. So if you think of a question during the presentation and you just want to jot it down so you remember to come and you say it up at the mic, great. If you would prefer not to go to the mic, and during the Q&A period, you can actually come hand me or Allison your note card with your question, and we will ask it to the panel. And it will be a panel format, so we'll just have to see, depending on the question, if you have a question specifically for one of the panelists, you can do that. If it's a general question, we will try and do our best to figure out who is the best person to answer that question. Lastly, if you can ask one question at a time, that would make our lives a lot easier. You will absolutely have another opportunity to get up and ask another question. So we will stay as long as you have questions. And also just let's be respectful of everyone's time. There are a lot of people from the public here who have questions, and we want to answer every single question that we possibly can. So just be respectful of people's time. Yes.
Housekeeping announcement. We didn't realize when we made our arrangements here that the alarm has to be set by 9 o'clock, which means that everything has to be broken down and everyone has to be outside by 9. So I think that when the hour of 8:30 strikes, we're going to have to really get busy here, put things away, and help Mike. This is Mike from Available Media. He's doing the recording and he's providing a lot of the microphones to help Mike get his stuff out and, get our stuff out.
Well, we can use this spot over here.
Excellent point. Janet, thank you for that. I was not aware of that. So we will make sure we get out of here and respect the time of the facility. Oh, okay, and John is letting me know that he's actually passing out note cards, so if you would like one, just raise your hand and he will bring one to you. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our chief scientist, Dennis McQuillan, and he's going to provide you with an overview of groundwater nitrate pollution in this area that we're talking about, particularly related to these 3 sites and to Harris Arroyo.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you, everybody, for attending, and we really appreciate the invitation to talk about this really important subject. Nitrate is a really significant issue for groundwater quality in the state of New Mexico. And I want to just give you a primer on the nitrogen cycle, which begins in the atmosphere. Most of the nitrogen is the predominant gas in our atmosphere. It can be fixated into soil, into organic nitrogen. Plants will take it up. They're part of the nitrogen cycle. It can get eaten by humans and animals, and they excrete waste. As the plants decay, they put organic nitrogen into the soil. And then there are a series of chemical reactions driven by soil bacteria that can transform the organic nitrogen into ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. And the nitrate, obviously, can go into groundwater. Once in the groundwater or in the soil moisture, the bacteria can also do a process called denitrification, where they take nitrate and convert it to nitrogen gas, which then returns to the atmosphere and starts the cycle over again. In addition to the atmospheric nitrogen, human and animal waste, we have fertilizer and industrial waste as well. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. We may be covering some of this stuff pretty quickly, but we can talk afterwards. Within New Mexico, we have more than 200 documented plumes of groundwater contamination that involve nitrate statewide. And these plumes have affected more than 700 private domestic wells. These wells are not covered and protected by the Safe Drinking Water Act. I live in a house with a private domestic well, and we pay taxes, but we don't get anything back from our tax money for our private domestic water infrastructure, as well as 81 public water supply wells. So it's one of the more common groundwater contaminants in the state of New Mexico. The reason we regulate nitrate is one of the health effects it can cause is the blue baby syndrome. It's also known as methemoglobinemia. And there have been 5 incidents that we're aware of in the history of the state of New Mexico. 2 are confirmed and 3 are anecdotal, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. And the sources of nitrate contamination include sewage, septic systems from private houses like me, municipal sewage, dairies, applying too much fertilizer to a farm, high explosives, low explosives, munitions, nitric acid, and we have chemical fingerprints for each of these that I'll explain tonight as well. We also have natural geologic sources of nitrate in groundwater. There are evaporite minerals that occur naturally, and we also have evaporation of rainwater in this area that's added to the nitrate. So in many of these cases, there can be multiple sources of nitrate contamination. This is a air photo of the West Mesa in Albuquerque. I'm just going to show you this an example of septic tank contamination. And the lots are too small. Everybody has a well in the front yard and septic system in the backyard. These are half-acre lots in a very shallow groundwater. And you can see the nitrate concentration indicated by these numbers. 10 is the drinking water standard, 10 parts per million. So you can see the nitrate's very low as it comes in. There's a mobile home park. They contaminated their own well. And then we have nitrate way above 10 in some of the private domestic wells. This is a very common thing all over the state, including this area. Now let me talk about the blue baby cases we have. We have 3 that are reported anecdotal, that were never documented with laboratory tests. We had one in Carnway, which is in Tijeras Canyon. This was actually documented by the U.S. Geological Survey, and the child was treated at a hospital here in Albuquerque, and it was written up as a case of the blue baby syndrome. There's a Walton report in 1951 that was one of the landmark papers on this disease. None of the 278 cases that he documented were in New Mexico. Now in 1980, we had a blue baby in Mountain View, which is in the South Valley of Albuquerque. That was one of the big, I'm dating myself now, one of the first big incidents that I investigated in my career with the state. And there was laboratory testing. The child who was treated with methylene blue by a pediatrician at UNM Hospital recognized it right away, treated him, and he survived. But he had almost 15% met hemoglobin in the blood, and normal level was considerably less than 1. And then in 1996, we had a child that died of cyanosis down at the next major drainage south of Isleta Pueblo called Abo Arroyo or Vaguita. We knew that the well had 150 to 200 of nitrate in there, but by the time we were notified, in the blood in the body was tested for met hemoglobin. It had been sitting around too long, so the cause of death was cyanosis, but in the well had sky-high nitrate, but we don't know, we can't make that connection for sure. The blue baby syndrome became a notifiable condition, a reportable disease in 2006 by the Department of Health. So it means that any physician who sees this condition in an infant has to report that to the State Department of Health. Since 2006, we've had no reports from the physicians in New Mexico. So one of the things about this disease, we have a lot of nitrate contamination, but only 5 possible incidents, is that even Walton and on up to today, it appears that there is a connection between gastrointestinal disorder predisposing the infant to having nitrate contamination. And I can tell you, having sampled 20,000 wells around the state, there's a lot of people have nitrate in their water. There's exposure pathways, but you don't have a lot of this disease. So the conclusion about the blue baby syndrome or methemoglobinemia is it's a very rare condition in New Mexico, but when it does occur, it is a very serious life-threatening condition that requires emergency medical attention. Now, because private domestic wells are not covered by the Safe Drinking Water Act, NMED has been providing free well testing for more than 30 years for private domestic well owners. And one of the parameters we test for is nitrate. These are my kids in 2004 helping Dad at a water fair, and I'm going to shamelessly tell you that my daughter Shannon is now a UNM environmental biology major. But we've tested more than 20,000 wells in the state, and we see nitrate, and we counsel people and give them information on how to protect themselves, and we hope that maybe we have prevented some nitrate, some blue baby syndrome. But we continue this today. We just had a huge water fair in Santa Fe, 500 wells. We had one in Farmington last year after the little incident with the mine water, 600 wells. So it's a win-win program where the people get a free well test, we get good surveillance data. So let's talk about the Kirtland-Sandia area. This is an air photo that shows the current direction of groundwater flow. It used to flow to the southwest, and the gradient, the direction of flow was reversed by a big cone of depression up here in the northeast heights from pumping in the city wells. But this is about the approximate direction. There's a big trough of groundwater, so the groundwater is flowing from the mountain front to the west, from the river to the east into this trough and up to the north. And we know this because of all the wells that have been drilled up there, hundreds of wells. So the first documented nitrate contamination in this area was discovered by the U.S. Geological Survey in Montesa Park, which is just west of Kirtland Air Force Base, and in Hell's Canyon, which is on Isleta Pueblo. These samples were collected in the 1950s, and you can go to the USGS website and look at these data. And they had really high levels of nitrate and really low levels of chloride. And I'm going to talk about the significance of that. Then in 1961, we had the blue baby up in Tijeras Canyon in Carnway. The Tijeras Arroyo comes down this way. That was documented in 1961. 1980, we had the blue baby in Mountain View. We also have nitrate, that area that I showed you, the air photo with the septic tank contamination. We have extensive contamination on the West Mesa. Not every well has got it, In some cases, there may be 10 or 20% of the wells in a neighborhood that have it. This area has been provided with city water and sewer, as has Mountain View, but the area to the extreme south does not have that. That's one of the things we can do to ease up on the nitrate contamination. And then most recently, we've got sewage contamination at Kirtland, the Tijeras Arroyo groundwater, which I think is the subject of this meeting, the Kirtland Golf Course, which is a sewage site, Tech Area 5, and the burn site, which are industrial contamination. So we have a lot of different sources of nitrate contamination in this watershed, and I'm going to talk about chemical fingerprinting. You know, one of the things we do when we investigate nitrate is we look at the other minerals in the groundwater and try and fingerprint them. If the nitrate is from human and animal waste, we always see elevated chloride. And so this is significant in those two that were documented in the 1950s. The chloride was very, very low. And we think it's a natural evaporation of rainwater at those locations. And if the groundwater bacteria are denitrifying the nitrate, taking it to nitrogen gas, that increases another mineral that we call bicarbonate. So one of the things we do is we draw these stiff diagrams. And you can look at the shape of these diagrams, which is based on the mineral content. On the left-hand side, we have the cations, the sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. On the right-hand side, we have the anions, chloride, bicarbonate, sulfate, and nitrate. We're plotting nitrate because it is a major constituent of these waters. In Mountain View, it is the dominant anion, which is remarkable. You almost never see that in natural water. So dairy waste has high sodium and calcium, high chloride, high sulfate, and high nitrate. And the area of this envelope is proportional to the total mineral content as well. Then we look at these two areas of septic contamination, Carnway and West Mesa. And all these have high nitrate. They're all above 10. The nitrate is there. The chloride is definitely elevated. And in these two cases, they have calcium. We go to Mountain View, where we had the blue baby in 1980. This is over-fertilization. This nitrate is 500 parts per million. The drinking water standard is 10. These are some of the highest nitrates in the world in a freshwater basin. And it's just remarkable. It's a calcium nitrate variety of water. And it's just really concentrated. Then you look at these areas that were documented and discovered in the 1950s. The total mineral content is very low, but you see this little tail on the anions for nitrate. And the nitrate is also the dominant anion there. But just looking at the shape of these, you can identify the sources. And then Vegeta, this is where we had that cyanosis fatality in the 90s. It's got high sulfate and nitrate calcium. There's multiple sources down there. We could talk about that in another meeting. So this diagram shows those same stiff plots for the Kirtland-Sandia area. The purple are the regional aquifer, and the yellow is the perched aquifer, and Brian has got a cross-section that explains the hydrogeology. And you can see some of these wells, like this one, have that little tail of nitrate. That's indicative of a natural source. Montesa Park, by the way, is just off this map. It was discovered in the 1950s by USGS. And then you see other wells have substantial levels of chloride, and that indicates a human or animal source. So even within this area, we have multiple sources of contamination. Here's the golf course at Kirtland, which has got nitrate contamination from wastewater. This is a diagram showing the chloride versus nitrate for various sources. And the dairy waste, which are these green diamonds, they're sky high in chloride and they're sky high in nitrate. There's no big surprise about that. Septic tank contamination has got moderate nitrate and moderate chloride. The septic tanks don't add a lot of chloride relative to dairies. And then these purple triangles are the wells that have that natural source. And one of the convincing pieces of evidence for this hypothesis that this is concentrated rainwater is that people analyze rainwater for nitrate and chloride. And we just took that analysis and concentrated it like you're evaporating water in a pan. And we come up with this curve right here. If you evaporate rainwater, the nitrate and the chloride are going to go along that line. And so these wells, and we only see this in close proximity to Tijeras Arroyo, Hell Canyon, and Abo Arroyo. And the nitrate is really, really low. The chloride's really low, and we've got nitrates at 100 or more milligrams per liter, or ppm. So this is another tool for fingerprinting. We also look at the non-radioactive isotopes of nitrogen in the nitrate. This is nitrogen 14 and 15. They don't degrade, but there are biological processes that fractionate the isotopes. And whether it's a dairy cow or a human or a horse or a groundwater bacterium, we preferentially utilize nitrogen-14 for cell growth, and we excrete nitrogen-15. So biological processes will increase the ratio of nitrogen-15 over 14. And the atmospheric nitrogen we define as 0, the international standard. So anything greater than 0 has been enriched. So if you look at the dairy waste, sewage, septics, it's enriched with N15. Fertilizer and explosives are manufactured from atmospheric nitrogen, so they're very low, close to 0. And same thing with the evapotranspiration that we see in the arroyos. Uranium mill was very enriched, and then we have a marine contamination case. So we have a variety of geochemical tools that we use to fingerprint these nitrate plumes, especially when there's multiple sources. So typically what has happened over the decades is that when we discover communities that have wells and septics that have high nitrate, city, state, county governments typically try to find money to push water and sewer in there. And people go off the wells and get safe drinking water that's protected by the federal law, the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that's been done for decades. We also have a process where we can take the nitrate contaminated water out, in land apply it, grow a golf course grass or alfalfa, and it's very simple, it's a very effective bioremediation system. We have to make sure we don't apply more than 200 pounds per year. They have to get a permit from Michelle Hunter in the Groundwater Bureau to do this, and it's carefully regulated, but this is another way to remediate the groundwater contamination. And Kirtland Air Force Base has been doing this at the golf course. So with that, I'm going to introduce Brian, who's with the Hazardous Waste Permitting Program. He's the regulator, and he'll talk about what they're doing. And then Chris is with the Oversight Program. He'll be the anchor of this presentation.
Hello, yes, I'm Brian Salem. I work for the Hazardous Waste Bureau. We're the lead agency within the Environment Department to regulate Sandia, and it's regulated by the permit that we issue to them, which tells them how to do corrective action. I'm going to talk about 3 sites today, the burn site, TA5, and Tierras Arroyo. And in all 3 cases, I will... Thank you. In all 3 cases, I will give a little background on the site, location, general parameters on groundwater, and then finish up with what the Environment Department is doing regulatorily to get these sites cleaned up. And as soon as we get going. Okay. Let me get a hard copy of my presentation. Does everybody else? She fooled me. A little levity. Okay, so location of a burn site groundwater is over here. It's on the eastern side of Sandia. For reference, this is Tierras cement plant, which you see as you drive through the canyon. And so this site is immediately south of it. This is a picture of the burn site looking northeast. So over here is where the cement plant is. Most of the operations, the testing was done here. Burn site was used to burn things that Sandia wanted. They were doing transport experiments to see whether something would survive a fire, an accident in transport. So they would put them in liquid JP8 or diesel, changed over time, set it on fire, assess whether their instrument or whatever they were testing on survived. And in the early days, they would usually just dump whatever was left over on the ground. And ultimately, they got into enclosed basins to run their test. It is still an active test site, I believe. Next. I'm next. All right, this is the groundwater flow direction at the burn site. It moves from east to west, pretty much parallel to this canyon, this drainage. That the picture that I took is showing this area mostly, and we have wells, this from here to here is about a mile, so the furthest wells are down gradient, and they are also above standards. This is a map of the plume. There are two high points, both in the high 30s this end and this end. Sandy is proposing a number of investigations to try to determine what's going on with the groundwater here, involving putting in some more wells in the middle, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So in review of the burn site, groundwater is between 100 and 325 feet in highly fractured and faulted bedrock, which makes hydrology very difficult to figure out. The groundwater there contains nitrate, up to 42 parts per million, and as Dennis already said, the standard is 10. Perchlorate was also detected at the burn site. They were fairly low, between 6 and 9 ppm, and the action level is actually 6 and 9 parts per billion. Action level is 15 parts per billion. That action level was recently adopted by EPA, and the state has adopted that as well at 15. It has been detected regularly at burn site since 2004 when that well was installed. Groundwater is monitored semi-annually at the site, and they have 12 monitor wells now. Depending upon what they find, we may require more to characterize the site. Currently, what's in the line is they're going to do an aquifer pump test, and they should be submitting to us a work plan to perform that in June 8th. We set hard dates. We recently negotiated with Sandia milestones that they have to meet for these three sites when deliverables are due to us, and then it's up to us to review them and approve it. And when we get the results on that test, we will then determine if more wells are needed and what further work has to be done to characterize the site. And that'll be done early 2017. And based upon the results of the aquifer pump test and additional wells if needed, in October 2020, they will submit to us a conceptual site model and a corrective measured evaluation report. The conceptual model is basically a discussion of site conditions, where the groundwater goes, what direction it goes, where it's coming from, their understanding of the dynamics of the groundwater beneath the site. The corrective measured evaluation is probably of more interest to the public in some ways. It's what they propose to do to clean up the site. And the Environment Department will evaluate this report to determine what is the best method to do that job. Sandia will recommend a method. We don't have to agree with them. But eventually, you might see the date a little bit out there, but it's going to take us a while to get all this data in and for Sandia to get their corrective measures evaluation report written to us. So it takes a while to get those things done. Next site I'm talking about is TA5, or Tech Area 5 at Sandia. It's located here, the northeast corner of Tech Area 3. This is a picture, an air photo of the site looking southwest over there towards the volcanoes. The plume covers this area right here, more or less. Tech Area 5 is where Sandia has its reactor, and they do experiments. It's a small reactor. They do experiments there using the reactor and other, as you can see, there's a network of buildings and other Sandia kind of science work goes on there. Okay, this is a map showing the TCE contamination at the site. There are two main constituents of contamination at TA5, TCE and nitrates. The plume, as you can see it, the max is about, I think, what was it, about 14 or 15? No, actually 17. And the southern end of it is not defined. That's why this is dashed. There also is a nitrate plume. One thing about the TCE plume in the realm of TCE plumes is very small. For example, Spartan, you may know of Spartan on Coors Road, their levels of TCE are in the thousands. So just to get a little perspective on what's going on at Sandia. It's not a major plume, but they do intend to clean it up, and they will be submitting a corrective measures evaluation for this site as well. So in review, regional groundwater here is 500 feet down, rather deep. They have 13 monitor wells installed. The first ones went in '93. The last ones went in a couple of years ago. Nitrate is 14 ppm. Standard is 10 ppm, and TCE is 0.019 ppm, and the standard is 0.005 ppm. They did install 3 monitor wells. We have not located the source of the groundwater contamination at TA5. There are a number of possible sources, but none of them were definitively identified as the source. We did soil borings, and we did not find a steady increase or a steady signal suggesting that they were the source. So they put in some soil vapor wells also to try to locate the source and to see what's going on in the Vado zone. They were sampled quarterly starting in 2011. The TCE ranged from non-detect to 2.5 parts per million volume. And there were a total of 31 separate VOCs detected in those monitoring. The max concentration is 2.8 parts per million, and of that, 2.8, 2.5 was TCE. So the vast majority of what you see in the soil is TCE. The maximum numbers were also at 350 feet deep, suggesting that whatever source there was is no longer there. The highest numbers are down below, so pretty much everything has migrated down to water already. And based upon those numbers that we detected above the water table, significant mass transfer of what's in the soil and vapor is not likely to move into the groundwater. There's not enough in the soil to transfer to the water and further contaminate the water. So the numbers we're seeing are probably the maximums. And they have been steadily decreasing. It's been looked at, as I said, since '93, so numbers are going down. Groundwater is monitored quarterly. Regulatorily, they have submitted to us a treatability study and for in situ bioremediation at TA5. What they intend to do initially is a test run. They're going to take water out of the ground, add some amendments, some nutrients to it, see if they could biodegrade the contaminants away. If that is successful, they intend to install up to 3 injection wells and put those amendments and nutrients into the ground and essentially have them eat up the contaminants. They have submitted to NMED, to the Groundwater Bureau, to Michelle's Bureau, a discharge permit. In order to put anything in the groundwater, they have to get a permit from the Environment Department and they are looking at that to make sure there are no intended consequences of injecting anything into the groundwater. In addition to characterize the site, part of the work plan they're doing will include a couple more model wells to the south to finish the characterization. And in this case, the treatability study, if it's successful at the pilot level, installing 3 more injection wells and running tests will take them about 2, 3, 4 years, and which means that their conceptual model and the corrective measures evaluation report will not be to us until 2022. The last site today is Tierras Arroyo groundwater, and it's in the central part of the Sandia Labs. It underlies 3 tech areas, 2, 3, and 4, I believe. And next, complicated 1, 2, and 4. Once again, it's located here. This is Tierras Arroyo, running immediately to the south of it. Another major arroyo is Coyote. And to give you a reference, the burn site is on Lawrence Canyon, which comes off of and runs into Coyote Canyon. Illustration, there are a lot of monitor wells out there. About half of them are in the perched aquifer, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that on my next slide. And the other half are in the regional water. A very basic diagram of what's going on, what I mean by a perched system. This section right here, about 200 or 40 feet down into the vadose zone, is a denser, thicker layer of soil, mostly clay, and it's preventing the water from moving through it. So the water over time is collected on top of that, and that becomes a perched water. And these are potential sources: sewage lagoons, lawns, leaking pipes. There are a lot. Once again, in the case of TAG, they have not definitively identified the source of the contamination. So the water drained down, came on the perched water system, and slowly over time is migrating down this perch system, and what we here call the zone emerging. There is a connection to the regional aquifer down below. Essentially, you have a full pot, and it's running out of the pot and running down off of it, if you could think of it that way. So this is a map of the regional, of the perched aquifer, and you can see the groundwater direction is opposite of almost everything else out of Sandia. It's going south and east. This is the direction of where that zone of merging is. And there are 4 or 5 wells with nitrate above standards and 1 with TCE above standard. The regional water table, another 100 or 50 feet below that, has 1 well above standards for nitrate, which would be that one there. If you look on those pictures, you get a better idea which ones these are. So in conclusion, what the Environment Department is doing out here at the Tierras Arroyo is it's about 40 square miles in the north central portion of Kirtland Air Force Base. Both Sandia and Kirtland have authority or regulatory, not regulatory, but responsibility for the plume at Tierras Arroyo. Both a perched and the regional aquifer are present, and the groundwater investigation and monitoring has started in 1992. Current monitoring well network is 30 monitor wells, and of those, 21 are regularly sampled for water quality. As I said earlier, the sources of contamination are many: sewage lagoons, outfalls, wastewater outfalls, septic systems. It's such a large groundwater plume that it was hard to identify all those sources. The 2 contaminants of concern are nitrate and TCE. So looking at the results from 2003 to 2014, TCE in perched water, the maximum is 0.01 parts per million, and there's only 1 perch well that is above standards for TCE. The rest of them are below standards. Nitrate contamination ranges from 8.6 to 38 parts per million, and above the maximum of 10. And as I said earlier, there is 1 well in the regional that is above standards. It's at 31. So to conclude, every June we get our annual groundwater map from Sandia, or groundwater report. It will update all the results and be available to us and the public. For TAG, the current conceptual model and the corrective measures evaluation will be submitted to us in December of this year. And part of the corrective measures evaluation process involves input from the public. They will make a recommendation of how they see fit best on cleaning it up. We agree or disagree, and ultimately it's all presented to you to get your input as to what you think about what they're doing out there. So quarterly sampling continues, and that's about it for me. Thank you very much. I'd like to bring up Chris at this time, Chris Armillo. He's going to give you a little more detail about sampling that the Environment Department does out there. They essentially split sample with Sandia for all 3 of these sites, and he'll give you a little more detail on it.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Brian. My name is Chris Armijo. I work for the New Mexico Environment Department. Work for the DOE Oversight Bureau as the project lead for the groundwater monitoring program at Sandia National Laboratories. Today I will be presenting groundwater monitoring results from Burnside, Tech Area 5, and Tijeras Arroyo. You're going to see a lot of duplicate slides with the same maps that Brian used. He gave a more thorough description, so I'm just going to kind of summarize what he talked about, but we're mostly looking at data that the Oversight Bureau collected. So the mission of the Oversight Bureau is to ensure that activities at DOE facilities in New Mexico, including Los Alamos National Labs, Sandia National Labs, New Mexico, and the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, are managed and controlled in a manner that is protective of public health, safety, and the environment. The Oversight Bureau is an independent third party that performs confirmatory sampling and surveillance monitoring at these facilities in New Mexico. So separate from other regulatory bureaus in the department, the Oversight Bureau is non-regulatory. These programs include both joint and independent evaluations of all media. We sample for air, groundwater, stormwater, wastewater, surface water, soils and sediments, and vegetation. Did I skip one? Is that where I'm at? Okay, so here's a general overview of groundwater monitoring activities at Sandia National Labs. So the Bureau conducts verification and supplemental sampling at groundwater monitoring wells at Sandia National Labs. The primary purpose of this is to independently monitor and confirm groundwater quality. The Oversight Bureau and Sandia collect samples at the same time, or the Oversight Bureau and Sandia collect split samples using standard Sandia sampling procedures and equipment. So basically we collect samples at the same time from the same source using the same equipment. Split samples are typically collected as one of two equal portions of the same sample and analyzed separately by different laboratories. So like I said before, the Oversight Bureau samples are shipped to independent analytical laboratories, and they're analyzed using EPA-approved methods. Our results are compared to Sandia's data to ensure that the data that DOE releases to the public is validated and accurate. The Bureau also compares our data to the EPA drinking water standards. In addition, the Oversight Bureau looks at historical groundwater data to compare past and present results to determine any changes in groundwater quality. So you guys seen this map before. The first area I will be talking about is Burnside. It's located over here in Lawrence Canyon on the eastern end of the Coyote Canyon Test Area, which is on the eastern end of Kirtland Air Force Base. So on this, nitrate, as Brian had previously addressed, has been identified as a constituent of concern. It's been detected in groundwater above the EPA drinking water standards in samples collected from Sandia's monitoring wells. The EPA and state of New Mexico drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 parts per million. And elevated concentrations of nitrates were first detected at Burnside in 1996. So this is a map of Burnside monitoring well locations. The map that Brian already showed, but this cluster of wells right here, this is where the actual Burnside facility is located. Up here you have, so this is CYN MW4, which is the up gradient background monitoring well. And then down gradient, you have MW7, MW8, and MW13. And as Brian described before, that the groundwater flow generally moves from east to west. So Sandia samples the groundwater monitoring wells at Burnside semi-annually. In addition to nitrates, the Oversight Bureau also samples for volatile organic compounds, high explosive compounds, diesel and gasoline range organics, metals. We also sample for groundwater minerals and radionuclides. And perchlorate was also sampled at monitoring wells MW14A and MW15 in 2014 and 2015. So here's a summary of the Oversight Bureau's monitoring results from 2014 and 2015. There were no organic compounds that were detected above the method detection limits. No parameters were detected above the EPA drinking water standards except for nitrates at 7 Burnside monitoring wells. And like I said before, perchlorate was analyzed at the newly installed wells, 14A and 15, and no results were above 4.004 parts per million, so 4 ppb. Here's just a graph of the Oversight Bureau's nitrate results from 2014 to 2015. Units are in parts per million. There were a total of 7 monitoring wells that were detected above the EPA MCL of 10 parts per million. Highest nitrate concentration during this time period was from CYN MW9 at a concentration of around 35 parts per million. Also, the Oversight Bureau, on this it's kind of hard to see, but part of the Oversight Bureau's quality procedures is to send duplicate samples to the analytical laboratories to just kind of test out their accuracy. So we sent in samples, blind dupes at CYN MW12 and 14, and the duplicate samples pretty much compare with environmental samples. And I guess overall, the nitrate concentrations during this time period compare well to those historical values, to Sandia's historical values. So the next site is Tijeras Arroyo groundwater, referred to it as TAG. So the TAG study area is this shaded area over here, as Brian described before. There's 3 tech areas: Tech Area 1, Tech Area 2, and Tech Area 3, Tech Area 4. So both TCE and nitrates have been identified as constituents of concern. They have been detected above the EPA and State of New Mexico drinking water standards. The drinking water standard for TCE is 5 parts per billion, and nitrate is 10 parts per million. So another map Brian showed. This is a map of the TAG monitoring wells. There are a total of 21 monitoring wells that Sandia uses to measure for water quality. 11 of these monitoring wells are located in the perched aquifer. The other 10 are located in the regional aquifer. Sample frequency, so there are 8 monitoring wells. There are 8 monitoring wells in the TAG area that are sampled quarterly, another 4 that are sampled semi-annually, and the remaining 9 are sampled annually. In addition to VOCs and nitrates, the Oversight Bureau, again, we collect for metals, we collect for groundwater minerals, and radionuclides. So just a summary of the Oversight Bureau's groundwater results from 2014-2015. No metals or radionuclides were detected above EPA drinking water standards. TCE was the only volatile organic compound detected at or above the drinking water standard, and that was at monitoring well Y04, which is a monitoring well installed in the perched aquifer. Nitrate concentrations were also detected at or above the MCL at 5 of the TAG monitoring wells, and this graph shows, so you have the five monitoring wells at TAG during 2014-2015 that were detected at or above the EPA MCL of 10 parts per million. The highest concentration during this time period was from TJA4, which was around 29 parts per million. And it's interesting, this TJA4 is one of the monitoring wells that is located in the regional aquifer. The other four monitoring wells are located in the perched aquifer. We're going to be all right. We're going to shut down. All right, so let's go through this real quick. Sample results from Y04. The Oversight Bureau sampled it twice, once in 2014, once in 2015. There's a result over here of 5 micrograms per liter, and it was sampled again, and results are around 8.3. So I'll just go through this last area real quick. So
We've only got about an hour left here before we have to start cleaning up. And I'm concerned, I mean, this isn't really that interesting going through each one of these sites because it's all in the documentation. I would suggest we move on to questions instead of going through all of this.
okay.
We're running out of time to ask questions.
So this is the last area I'll be talking about. Good. All right. So the last area is Tech Area 5, located in the northeast corner of TA3. The area. So TCE and nitrates have been identified as constituents of concern in TA5. So in the TA5 monitoring wells, there are 16 monitoring wells that are sampled for groundwater quality. Again, Sandia conducts sampling on a quarterly, semi-annual, and annual basis. The Oversight Bureau, again, collects for VOCs, nitrates, metals, groundwater minerals, and radionuclides. A quick summary of Oversight Bureau results from 2014 and 2015. So contaminants of concern, TCE was the only VOC detected at or above the EPA MCL at 5 of the monitoring wells, and then nitrate concentrations were detected at or above the drinking water standard at 2 monitoring wells. So just a summary of the Oversight Bureau's results from Tech Area 5, your nitrate results, both T8 or LWDS MW1 and TA5 MW10 were detected at or above the EPA EPA drinking water standards. TCE concentration also exceeded the EPA MCL at 5 of the monitoring wells. Highest concentration was LWDS MW1, around 17 parts per billion. And then you guys have all these slides. So just to wrap it up, so the Oversight Bureau, we will continue to collect groundwater samples, to collect split groundwater samples from the 3 areas that I talked about, Burnside, Tech Area 5, and Harris Arroyo, as well as other study areas at Sandia National Labs. At a minimum, groundwater sampling will consist of VOCs and nitrates. And then all of our Oversight Bureau data is available on the NMED website, and there is a link to the Oversight Bureau's webpage. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get started with our Q&A. So it's going to be, we're going to keep the panel up here so they can address questions. If there's something that we can't answer for you up here, I will probably cherry pick some of my folks, or even possibly some of the Sandia folks, to answer some of those technical questions. I'd also just like to add that, when Janet and I started contemplating this meeting, one of the things that she told me was, we want the detail, we want the data. So that's what you got tonight. And we know that you want that information, so that's why it was set up the way that it was. So if you have note cards and you don't want to come up to the microphone and answer questions or ask questions, one of my folks, John or Michelle, can collect those from you, and I can read them to the panel. But if not, I will offer for you all to please come to the microphone and we'll start Q&A.
I have a question on page 7. The stiff diagrams for nitrate contaminated groundwater. Oh. Yes. Sister Marlene Parrott. My question is on page 7. You talked about where the green area, and you said that that's one of the largest sections that I understood. I was wondering if you could repeat that, and what does it mean to have over-fertilization? What does that consist of?
Okay, those are really, really good questions. Well, the Mountain View area is down where Tijeras Arroyo comes into the valley, into the inner valley of the Rio Grande. And the nitrate we have down there are some of the highest levels in the world that you'll see in a freshwater aquifer. They're just off the chart. And over-fertilization is where the farmers applied more nitrogen to the crops than the crops could take up. And so the excess nitrogen washed into the groundwater. And this happened in the 1940s and 50s. And back then, if a little fertilizer worked good, a lot worked better, and we know better nowadays. And so there was a severe contamination from fertilizer that was centered around 2nd Street and Camino Uno, if you know the area, or Shirk Lane, right along where the arroyo used to be. And it moved south, and now it's getting pulled to the northeast into that kind of depression.
is that going to stay, or is that being remediated, or what is what's happening there?
It is moving maybe on the order of 100 to 125 feet per year to the northeast. And there was a pilot study to feed the bacteria more carbon and allow them to denitrify the nitrate. Because when you have nitrate, the bacteria can actually respirate the nitrate, and that process I showed denitrification. And there's just not enough money to do this on a scale of a square mile, which is the footprint of the plume. And the farmers are long gone, and there was just a family operation. It doesn't qualify for Superfund because nitrate's not a hazardous waste, and it's an orphan site. But it's not moving fast.
Hi, my name is Susan Skirman. I noticed several times that TCE levels were higher than acceptable, and I was wondering if you could talk about the impact on human health with those elevated TCE levels. Thank you.
Right now, those are detected in monitoring wells, not in drinking water wells. So for the TCE from this site, there's no human exposure pathway through drinking water yet, right? And we're going to keep it that way. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was good, Dennis.
Okay.
Joe Zupan with Amigos Bravos. Wow, I have so many questions, but I'll pick one. This is kind of for you, Brian. I worked on a number of rec cleanups, and our hope was always to go from problem identification to cleanup within 30 years. If I'm doing my math right, you're going from problem identification to a corrective measures study in 30 years. Why so long?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what we see at Sandia and at federal facilities, funding comes in as a large element in getting things done there. They only have so much a budget to work over the years, and that's part of the issue. The other part of the issue was other regulatory requirements that the Environment Department had to get done in terms of getting a new permit out. So it's a combination of money, lack of people to work on the projects, and it took a while to finally get enough information to determine how big a problem it was. You know, like when the first wells went in at TAG, which I guess you're talking about from the early 90s, it wasn't identified as that much of a problem. It was in the perch water, it wasn't going to go anywhere. But over time, we realized that there are potential impacts to health and environment, and as it got better characterized, we realized that we need to get something done. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer why it took so long. I don't know, maybe Sandia would have, John, would you have any thoughts on why Sandia took, and why the state and Sandia took as long as they did to get these things done from the facility side?
John Cochran, India National Lab. And so she was recognizing some of these 92, 96 first wells.
Could you possibly use the microphone? I'm afraid it won't, your voice won't be correct.
Good afternoon. John Cochran, India National Labs. Yeah, so these sites go back to 92, 96 when we put in the first monitoring wells. And I would clarify that pretty early on we recognized there was no imminent threat from any of these sites. Okay, low levels, typically nitrate, typically long distances from any production well. And so we shared our data with NMED, and as Brian said, there were a lot of priorities. And in some cases, reports went in, and maybe it took years before somebody had the opportunity to review them. And so they're just working their way through the system. I would also add, and you know this, that working with groundwater is a slow, legal process. So you write a work plan, it gets reviewed, takes 6 months or a year. You get a drilling contractor, you put in the monitoring wells, you monitor. We're required to monitor for 8 quarters, 2 years before decisions can be made. So maybe you put in a few wells, you do 2 years worth of monitoring, and you discover you need a few more wells, you write another work plan. It's a very slow process. So one, we recognized early on no imminent threat. 2, it's a slow process. 3, other priorities showed up. I hope answers or partially answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
So first of all, I'd like to thank NMED for arranging this meeting and thank Katie for her organizing of it. And I'd like to thank the water groups. I wasn't the only organizer here. The water groups all participated and all played a part in bringing this meeting together. So my main concern is the Tierras Arroyo site. And during the presentations this evening, I did not see what I have seen in Paul Robinson's report from Southwest Research and Information Center. That is, there's been no mentioning of what I believe to be a fact that Paul gleaned from Sandia documents, that the contaminants at Tierras Arroyo are going deeper and the concentrations are going higher. And that's a very large site, and we know that contaminants are already in the perched aquifer, and some contaminants are already in the regional aquifer. Now, I know that we're not real close to a source well there, but the water groups believe that when there are problems in the aquifer, that we should not wait until those contaminants get close to the source of our drinking water, that we believe that the aquifer should be cleaned up. And I'm very concerned about Tierras Arroyo. And my main question is, would you go over the increase of contaminants and the deepening of those contaminants at Tierras Arroyo? Thank you so much.
Well, let me, also good questions. The deepening of the contaminants, we know it's going from the shallow perched aquifer into the deep aquifer. Now, once it's in the deep aquifer, the zones that are pumped by the city wells, the Ridgecrest well field and Kirtland wells, VA hospital well, those zones are confined by clay layers, and we have artesian pressure down around 1,200 feet and deeper, which is where the water supply is drawn. And what that means is that the water wants to flow up from those deeper zones into the shallow zone. And this is something that we've seen all across the Kirtland fuel plume and throughout most of the area of this basin, where in the deep zone we have upward hydraulic gradients, meaning the water wants to flow up rather than down. But the perch zone is going down, but within the deep zone we have upward flow from the deeper production zones. Does that make sense?
So what you're saying is the contaminants are leaving the perched aquifer and going into the regional aquifer, but you're saying once they get into the regional aquifer, they're not going deeper? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. They're confined to the uppermost water-bearing zone within the deep regional aquifer by the upward artesian vertical gradients from the deeper zone. 90% of the water produced by the wells of the utility authority is from below these clay horizons.
So you are saying that the contaminants are going deeper, but what you're saying is you don't believe they will go much deeper? Is that what you're saying?
It's the contaminants in the perched aquifer have the potential, well, they are, as Brian showed you, to move down into the deeper zone. And once they get there, they're staying in the upper zone of saturation in the regional aquifer, at least in this area.
How long have they been in the regional aquifer?
The man-made contaminants for several decades, the natural contaminants have been there for geologic time.
And TCE?
TCE is a man-made contaminant.
And they've been in the regional aquifer for 2 decades?
On the order of decades, I would think.
You know, I'd still like to say that our position is they should be cleaned up if they're in the aquifer, the TCE. Thank you.
Janet, just to, we are concerned about the contaminants in the water as well, and part of what we're doing with Sandia is we are getting corrective measures evaluation. Essentially, they are in the process of finishing the characterization of the sites and then submitting to the Environment Department their ideas on how to clean it up. So sometime once the characterization is finished, we will be moving forward with cleanup on all 3 of these sites.
I wish that we could be kept more closely informed about these things because I've tried some links that don't work on the website, and all we're going by is a once-a-year report, and I have a lot of anxiety about this site. I wish we could be more in touch. Yeah.
One thing I would say is, as Chris mentioned, the DOE oversight posts results quarterly on the Environment Department website. So there is much more current groundwater data available to the public, like every 3 months, on all 3 of these sites.
And is that Chris, is that public, is that layperson friendly, those reports?
Yes, that's available on the NMED website. If you click on the Oversight Bureau link and go.
Is the information layperson friendly is what I'm asking, yes.
Yes, the reports are there. They're PDF reports.
That the layperson could easily understand?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to have Susan address this very quickly because she can talk about the format of those reports too.
So the reports themselves are lay friendly in the sense that we have a 1 to 4 page overview that tells you what location the wells were at, whether it's Tejeras Arroyo, whether it's burn site, whether it's the mixed waste landfill, any of the sites in Sandia groundwater, tells you where they are, what wells were sampled, what analytes, meaning what chemicals we sampled for, whether they were radionuclides, whether they were organics, and then we compare it to the standards and we give you a table of all the results.
And Janet, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a glimmer of hope. The nitrate has been being cleaned up by the Air Force under a land application at the golf course. They actually had one of their supply wells, Kirtland 7, go belly up with nitrate, meaning that it had low nitrate and it went up to 10 or to 20 actually. And they converted that from a drinking water well to a golf course irrigation well. And in the course of 15 years, the nitrate has dropped down to 1 or 2. So we have had that one, we put a hole in the nitrate contamination, if you will, by pumping that well. They continue to pump water from wells on the golf course that have high nitrate and land apply it. And so we have some success. The Air Force is committed to continue that bioremediation land application process.
My name is Jeremiah, and the question I have was, what can be done specifically to make young people aware of this contamination?
I am really glad, as you saw, my daughter's a student at UNM. Come to meetings like this. We also have an outreach program for high schools. We just had a presentation, soil column tests that were done by the AP, the Advanced Placement group at Highland High School. We're looking for student volunteers to do tests and to look at data, and we will reach out to you if you're interested. We're glad to have you on board. Thank you.
And I would just add, that's an awesome question, and we're very excited that we've got young people asking those questions. So, I think there's a myth out there, at least in my opinion, in my year and a half being in this position, that the Environment Department will not respond and come to meetings and present, and that is absolutely not true. If you request, as Janet did and others in your water groups requested this meeting, it's not easy, but we will do it. We represent the state of New Mexico. That is our job. So we will come, we will present anytime you request it on hopefully most of any subjects that you request. Like I said, it's not an easy thing to put together all the time, but we will get it done.
My name is Daniel Arcila. There are a lot of farms in the Albuquerque area. What are the specific threats to agriculture in the future from these more serious chemical contaminants?
Well, you guys have really good questions. Let me address, first of all, the nitrate issue. We know a lot better today about not using too much fertilizer. And the same thing goes with pesticides. We've never had a heavily chemically reliant agriculture industry. Now, your question also gets into an emerging issue, and that is of chemicals that can get into the food chain. We're very concerned right now along the Animas River about lead from a mine site getting taken up into the crops and into the food web. The lead in the river goes into the algae and then into the bugs that live in the river that the fish eat. They eat the algae, and we eat the fish, the birds eat the fish, and some of these chemicals can get taken up into the food web. Not just heavy metals, but there are persistent pesticides, and there's all types. We don't have enough time tonight to really fully answer your question, but it is spot on as an emerging issue. And there are also endocrine disrupting chemicals in the environment that disrupt the endocrine systems of mammals and humans, and it's really a really big issue. And if you like science, stay with it, go to UNM or New Mexico Tech, and come work for us.
And I'd like to add one thing to that. The 3 sites at Sandia that we identified as having groundwater contamination are all related to historical releases. Sandia no longer contaminates groundwater. The processes that they used, the methods of testing back then are not done anymore. So, and all the land application is done. So these sites are relics of the past, and we will very actively attempt to get them cleaned up long before you're an old man. Yes.
My name is Carol Benson. I think the question I'll choose here, I'm wondering about the standards of, like, for instance, for TCE and for perchlorate. Are those standards agreed on by most scientists, and are they considering the effects on small females and babies and the gamete? Or is it, like one size fits all type figuring?
Yeah. Well, the standards they're all subject to extensive public comment in public hearing. Both the drinking water standards, which are adopted by the federal EPA, and the state groundwater standards, we can't adopt a standard unless it's subject to public hearing. And anybody has an opportunity to comment, provide testimony and suggestions. Having said that, I will say that the statutes require that the decision makers weigh the social economic impacts and issues as well as the health issues. But in general, the standards are designed to protect the most sensitive portion of the population. The nitrate standard of 10, that's designed to protect infants. Healthy adults can tolerate a higher level of nitrate. And I say healthy adults can tolerate a higher level of nitrate without developing that blue baby syndrome. And I've been involved in rulemaking for the state since 1981. I know Paul and his people have been involved in it, and there's usually appeals, challenges to standards that are adopted, and but it's an elaborate process.
Would you say it's controversial or not?
Oh, it's highly controversial. Anytime we propose a new standard, or if we propose to lower an existing standard based on new information, it's highly controversial.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me what the effects of chloride are on humans?
The effects of chloride? Chloride is a naturally occurring mineral. It's in table salt, which is sodium chloride. It's ubiquitous all over the world. And it ranges from very low concentrations like I showed you on my stiff diagrams in a freshwater basin, and then you can get into like the area by Carlsbad where you have brine aquifers. You can have really sky-high levels. Some of those brine aquifers are 10 times saltier than seawater. They're at the saturation point. You can't get any more sodium chloride in that water down in the Permian, in some of those Permian Basin aquifers down by Carlsbad, because they're at saturation. You just can't drink the water with high chloride and keep it down. So the chloride is not a health parameter, but it's clearly a parameter that governs whether or not water can be used for drinking, for irrigation, and in livestock watering.
And Michelle, I hate to put you on the spot, but I didn't know if you had anything to add related to her question about the standards.
So the groundwater, the New Mexico groundwater standards are different than the federal drinking water standards. The state adopts the federal drinking water standards for drinking water, but we have different groundwater standards that were promulgated many, many years ago. And so we are in the process right now, and it's on our website, of changing some of our standards and some other parts of our regulations right now to make the TCE standard much more strict than it is today. We want to go to the federal MCL if we can. There will be some pushback, I'm sure that there will be, but that is our goal, is to get that TCE standard down to a much more protective level. Well, in certain realms, I mean, these were promulgated 30 plus years ago, some of them. And so technology has really caught up with us with respect. We had the first groundwater standards in the country in New Mexico because we understand how important it is to protect groundwater in the state. But as Dennis was saying, it's very, very difficult to change the standards. And so Dennis changed the uranium standard about 8 years ago, and that was the first one in a long time, and it's been the last one. And so that's why we're going to do this now, because we know now how problematic TCE is for human ingestion and inhalation as well, because it can lead to other problems with respect to the environmental media that's impacted by it. The soil gets impacted, the air, that kind of thing. And so we really want to be much more protective with respect to our TCE standard. We want to get in line with the federal standard, and that would be a standard of 5 parts per billion or 0.005 parts per million, which right now, I hate to tell you this, right now it's 100. And so we really need to get that a much lower number.
And when we lowered the uranium standard, the hearing lasted for several days, was recessed, reconvened the next year, and there was still an industry appeal. Yeah. There was an industry appeal, a challenge to the new standard. We prevailed in court, but it's always controversial.
Well, let's be very clear, the city is regulated to that lower federal standard.
Right.
I'm David Miller. I'm with Sandia National Labs. Let's be very clear. We are regulated to the lower federal standard, and that's the standards that the state regulates our cleanup criteria to.
My name is Crisito Flores, and I probably have the dumbest question of all times.
I can't hear you.
There are no dumb questions, I promise.
Yeah, rule number 1 is there are no dumb questions in any public meeting.
This is probably the dumbest one. Can some of the waste cause genetic mutations?
Can what cause genetic?
Like some of the wastes, like biohazard radiation, some kind of waste?
There are a number of health effects. It sounds like you may want to go into toxicology. UNM has got a great toxicology program. There are some contaminants that make you have acute health effects, like the blue baby syndrome. Yeah. They drink it and their lips turn blue and their fingernails turn blue. That's an acute health effect. There are some that are carcinogens that cause cancer. There are some that cause birth defects, and some cause mutations. And some disrupt your endocrine system. So the short answer is yes.
Yeah, I was thinking more is mutations besides death, like mostly besides death. like
well,
movie,
death.
Yeah, like movie death, like how they have crazy movies of waste go into humans and bugs and creatures of all kinds of deathly things. Like the movie Chuck, they homeless people turn into radiation monsters, like, have glowing eyes, that will come out of the sewers and kill you. That kind of
We
mutation.
haven't seen anything like that yet. But maybe you should go to Hollywood and write some scripts.
That movie's already filmed out. That movie came out in 1985, and I was thinking of like crazy movies, like The Crazies. They can become psychos, and that caused by death and hazardous wastes. And the movie Eight Lady Freaks, they caused it by biohazard wastes. Like they got bigger. Yeah, I kind of like movies like that, and I want to see if they actually come actually true.
Well, you know, we're proposing to maybe inject proprietary bacteria into the jet fuel plume at Kirtland. And these bacteria have an appetite for eating hazardous waste. And so at a public meeting, I was asked the question, well, are these bacteria going to take over the world? Well, it's really too late. Bacteria already rule the world. They're in our bodies, they're in the air, they're in the water, and they're in the soil. It's too late. Bacteria control the world. All the biochemical reactions, the reason we're here is because of bacteria. So fortunately, most of them are friendly, unless you go to Roswell.
Yeah.
And I would also add that there are no waste streams identified at Sandia that cause zombieism.
I think you're like preferring the movie Escape from LA. That caused by like death of gas and radiation. Big one. Yeah.
All right.
I gotta say that's dumb.
Thanks for lightening it up.
Hi, thank you for being here. I have a question about time. Can you hear me? Closer, okay, oh, better. Yeah, thanks for being here, all of you. I have a question about time. I'm just noticing, it says on the environmental oversight of the terrace oil groundwater that the corrective measure evaluation is due March 20th, 2022. And I'm just so concerned about like the time, 6 years from now. And, you know, you said at one point there wasn't enough, there was kind of money and staff involved in these processes, but isn't this important enough for more money and more staff? Because once contaminations happen, they're deadly, and we know that from these other areas of the country now that are dealing with some serious water problems. So my question is, can you speed up the process? I know it's a big bureaucracy, but how do you speed up the process? May I have your name, please? I'm Judith Kidd, Water Groups.
Yeah, Judith, we are concerned about how long it takes to get these projects done as well. And I guess I would just say that we're working as quickly as we can. I think John made a very good point, and I would support him in that these 3 sites that we identified have, I would say, no risk to human health. They're groundwater sites. They are miles from any supply wells. And given, I don't just say that cavalierly. We could look at how long the concentrations are there and then how fast they move and what direction they're moving. All that information are things that are being put together for us to evaluate these sites, decide what to do. And from what we know now, they're moving very, very slowly and are virtually impossible to reach any supply wells. So if that alleviates your concern, I would be glad. But I think that's about were these major sites, when we do find something that is dangerous to human health and environment, we do act on it very quickly. And these ones in particular are isolated and in low enough concentrations that's part of the reason why we haven't jumped on them as fast as we would like and as fast as you would like.
And I would just like to add, Judith, that the regulatory process for working through each of these sites, you're absolutely right. It's bureaucratic. It can be very slow, and I know how frustrating that is. And I think on a lot of levels, that's unacceptable to us as well. And it is our job to get that work done. That being said, what I would say is going back to that regulatory process, Sandia, DOE, and NMED need to understand the nature and extent of the contamination in that particular area before they can actually move forward and propose a remedy for that particular site. That investigation process, that characterization process, is lengthy. It just takes time because they have to monitor over time, and a lot of these wells, they're monitoring quarterly. We compile all of that data, and that helps inform their proposed remedy down the line. So I know that those dates, particularly for the corrective measures evaluations, are very concerning because they seem like they're really far out into the future. But that's actually why they're out into the future, is because we have to understand what's going on at each of those sites to make an informed decision about the best remedy to clean up that particular site.
Thank you.
My name's Simon Polakowski. I'm not a scientist. Okay, how's that? I noticed that Mr. Armijo is with the Department of Energy, I believe.
The Department of Energy Oversight Bureau.
Oversight Bureau. Well, the Department of Energy used basically the same language that Mr. Salem just used, that the possibility of any type of accident at WIPP was impossible. And yet, here we are, I think a little over a year after an accident there. He also said, used the language intended. I'm not worried about somebody intentionally trying to pollute the groundwater. It's this unintentional. I'm sure the people that are the cause of this mess didn't intend to poison anything, but they did. And I'm sure that all these people from Sandia that are here this evening have very good intentions about cleaning this up. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And again, with the woman before me mentioned, the timeline is very disturbing. Anyways, thank you.
Hi, Joe Zupan, Amigos Bravos. So we've had about 24 years to figure out the nature and extent, but we still don't fully understand it enough to develop a corrective measures study. But then we say that the pathways are not complete. We haven't done a human health risk assessment, correct? There's kind of a muddle here. It's like we don't understand the nature and extent after 24 years. We haven't done a human health risk assessment, but we're pretty sure there's no complete pathways, including daughter products from TCE through the vadose zone like vinyl chloride. Help us with that. I mean, that's there's a very specific sequence you go through in a RCRA investigation, RCRA facility investigation, a corrective measures study, a corrective measures implementation, a human health risk assessment as required. It just doesn't seem like any of those bases have been rounded in 24 years.
Well, in all these sites, there were a long series of RFIs, RCRA facility investigations performed. Each one, based on the data, we'd go back and say, well, it's not quite finished yet. Go out and put some more wells in, or go out and collect some more data. Like in all these sites, they were initially investigated back in the 90s, but there was a lot of work done between the 90s and now. It wasn't all the wells went in the 90s and then we did nothing for 20 years. There's an iterative investigation that's been performed at all these sites over time. We could, I could give you the dates when the wells were put in. You'll see, every couple of years more wells were put in. I mean, it takes a long time in the case of TAG to put in 30 monitor wells.
Yeah, I do understand that, Brian, but I hate to put you on the spot because I know you're managing a tough program and a tough project, but what percentage complete of our understanding of the nature and extent of contamination have we achieved? Are we 20%, 30%, 80%? I mean, I know that's a subjective, qualitative question. I'm sorry.
It varies for these three sites. What I'd say, I mean, as we said, I think for TAG, we're getting the CME later this year. So that one is almost completely investigated. And Sandia should be proposing cleanup remediation by the end of this year. So hopefully by next year, we'll be starting to implement that. There is a public process involved in that, and they'll make a
looking forward to
recommendation. And then you guys can look at it and decide whether you agree with whatever we support. In the case of burn site, I've been working on that one myself for about 5 years now. The first wells went in quite some time ago. And there's been a series of wells. I mean, all these ones, I'd say with burn site, we thought we were almost there. And we went downfield and put another well in and discovered a little more contamination that was unexpected. And as a result, we kind of backed off, and we're now trying to characterize the site better, to understand it better. Burn site is very complicated. It's in fractured bedrock. You could put a well in here, and 20 feet away, you won't detect the same water. It's that fractured and faulted.
Yeah, I understand it's a complex site. I would just request that you consider asking for a human health risk assessment.
Excuse me? Asking for?
For a human health risk assessment.
That is part of the process. Okay. And they will be done on all 3 sites.
When will those be completed?
Yeah, I mean, in conjunction with that corrective measures evaluation, there is a risk assessment done for the various proposals. So the farthest one out, I think John might.
Microphone.
I like yelling at people. John Cochran. For the groundwater sites, we've committed under our compliance order and consent to meet the federal, the EPA drinking water standards. So that pretty much drives what we clean up to. So in soils, we do human health risk assessments. For groundwater, we clean up to federal drinking water standards.
And I just wanted to respond from the 50,000-foot level. Statewide, we're glad you're asking these questions. We have a mandate under state and federal law to investigate and clean up groundwater contamination. And you have every right to hold our feet to the fire and Sandia's feet to the fire. Having said that, we have to triage the contamination cases that we're aware of. And one of the first things we do is try and eliminate human exposure pathways. We've got people drinking TCE in Santa Fe. We had a city well, it had benzene, EDB in it. We've had people drinking TCE in Socorro, Roswell, Las Cruces. We eliminate the exposure pathway. That's our first thing. We've had explosive levels of gasoline vapor. Now we have dangerous levels of lead in people's backyards in Aztec, in Flora Vista. And so I hope you appreciate we've got a lot on our plate and we have to triage these sites.
And I do appreciate that, and I appreciate your efforts on behalf of the citizens. Thank you. I know if you could set your own funding priorities, it would probably be different.
I was attending some luncheons that are held by Maggie Hart Stebbins. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen Boneem. I'm with the water groups. And at one of her luncheons, the subject was the Kirtland jet fuel spill. And she had someone who'd been hired by the Air Force, I believe, who explained very adamantly that there couldn't be any treatment or removal or remediation until more and more monitoring wells were installed, because otherwise the stuff could be sneaking between some of these monitoring wells, and so you would end up putting your extraction wells in the wrong place and blah, blah. Well, just a few months later, I went to another of those luncheons, and Ryan Flynn was there talking about how much was being done in terms of extraction. And the only factor I could see that might have changed the tone 180 degrees was public interest. That was all I could see.
And enforcement.
Well, yeah, but I felt that the enforcement might have been fueled by the public outcry. Possibly?
Well, do you want me to?
You go first.
Okay.
I mean, doesn't the squeaky wheel get the grease sometimes?
It does, but like I say, we have a mandate. The
Yeah.
legislature passed a law that tells us we have to clean up groundwater contamination. We were not at all happy with the state of condition of that plume. After a decade or more, there was no groundwater cleanup. There was enforcement, there was there's change of staff. The Air Force brought in their A-team from San Antonio, and in June of last year, the very first extraction well went in. December of last year, 2 more went in, and right now we're pumping 400 gallons a minute. We just had a field trip, public tour of the treatment system, a $14 million. It's the most robust state-of-the-art treatment system in the state of New Mexico. And now they're pumping it, they're going to collapse the plume and pull it back towards the base, away from the drinking water wells. And we are not going to let that plume reach the drinking water wells.
Okay. Is any of the reaching the air?
When they were vacuuming the soil to remove the fuel from the shallow where the spill occurred, they had to operate under an air quality permit issued by the city of Albuquerque. Just like any other source of air emissions, they had to put in treatment systems to scrub the vapor coming out of the soil and remove, so they weren't taking a soil and groundwater problem and creating an air pollution problem.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great
very
questions.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jason Dixon, and I was just wondering how much would the estimated cost of all these plans would be, like at the end, like the total?
Oh, that is a perfect question for Sandia. Costs.
How much is it going to cost to clean it up?
What do you say, Joe?
So I'm Joe Estrada. I serve as a project director there for the DOE at Sandia Laboratories. So I can tell you as scientists and engineers, we do estimates, and then you have to refine them kind of year by year, okay? So I can tell you currently, we're estimating, for example, to start focusing on these 3 groundwater areas with doing that treatment study at Tech Area 5, doing some pump tests, and maybe adding more wells if needed at Burnside, at Tijeras Arroyo. We're going to submit this report, and if it comes back, we need more wells to better characterize the nature and extent. We're looking at, let's see my memory here. So right now we're looking at these activities to come to closure, plus all the administrative closure of public meetings, public hearings, getting to final remedies. We're estimating it'll take us between now and 2028.
115 maybe additional. So 250.
And estimate the range could be somewhere between I'd say $15 to $20 million.
So we're about 10
is
minutes
the estimate range at this point.
answers from this point.
And what happens is you get more information, you start refining that estimate. So you start figuring out, well, at this area, we only want to do this much, or no, in this area, now we need to do more. And you start using, there's a computer program that lets you scope out the work, it lets you schedule it in sequences, the interfaces with the state, interfaces with the public, all that is in there. And it tells you, it spews out what's called a project baseline that'll tell you it's going to take you this long, and then per year is going to cost you this much, and then you add up the total. So that's the process that we use to come up with these estimates. It's a project management technique.
And just to toss out a figure, bulk fuels, they've already spent $100 million on it, and before it's done, it may approach $250 million. So these are expensive to clean up.
All right, thank you.
And Katie, 10.
Hello, my name is Uriel Quesada, and I just wanted to know what people could do to help raise money to clean these contaminations.
Pay your taxes. Pay your taxes. you know, as Dennis mentioned, the Environment Department does have volunteers. They're looking for interns. Katie, I believe we have programs to, you know.
We do. It's a fabulous question, actually, and a very complicated one. Because since we are a state agency, you know, we are funded by the state, but we also have special revenue funds and federal funding from EPA and some other sources. Sandia's funding comes from the Department of Energy. So you need to write your congressman and tell them that they need to get more funding for Sandia National Laboratory.
Okay.
Thank you. That's an actual, yes, we'll qualify that answer for cleanup money, yes.
And you can come to meetings like this and hold our feet to the fire and make sure you ask legislature and the Congress to fund environmental programs. You don't have to be the son and daughter of a geologist. You can do volunteerism. And you can go to college and become a scientist or an engineer and be part of the solution.
Okay.
Well, we can probably, we make presentations at schools. We can't do them every day, but we make presentations at schools all the time. We can.
Yes, I will give you a card before you leave tonight. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Paul Robinson. The Tech Area 5 and Tierras Arroyo had received notices of disapproval of their plans almost a decade ago. And the progress continues to be very slow. And it's, for me personally, disappointing that during the 3 years it took to arrange this meeting between Janet's efforts with John Keeling and yourself, the state has reached new schedules for each of these sites, which are disappointingly slow. The lack of public visibility of these sites, the failure of the state to post the procedural records along with the other Sandia records the way it does for the other DOE oversight facilities would have allowed more visibility to these sites. This 40 square mile Tierras Arroyo groundwater area, this is good size, as my mother-in-law would say. And there's quite a complex mix of potential sources, not just Sandia, not just Kirtland, not just the city. And the idea that these sites aren't likely to be a source of human health risk has been an excuse for slow investigations since Dennis and I began our careers. For the 4 decades that Dennis and I have been working on these issues. So the prejudgment of these sites, well, they're not going to reach very far. The contaminants on the surface aren't going to reach the groundwater. We have 3 groundwater contamination sites that are confirmed. The lack of pace is expensive and has allowed contaminants to spread. I would encourage the department to post the correspondence related to the regulatory process and make more opportunities available for discussion of that regulatory process. Hopefully that'll help citizens, local associations, local water authorities get faster responses to the protection of the parts of the aquifer that are high quality, deserve protection just because they aren't ready to be used. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment, Paul. And I'll just say in closing that I think most of the people in this room know that when Sandia submits a document to the New Mexico Environment Department, that document is a public document. You absolutely have the ability to request and access that document. However, I will concede that we need to do a better job of getting documents up on our websites and making sure that they are available. I think there are, for Kirtland Air Force Base currently, the new website that we have up that provides information is fairly intuitive, I think. I think it's easy to access and to navigate. So we will definitely take that comment under consideration and see how we can do a better job and make things more available for you. Yeah, I know we need to probably wrap up, but I did want to say thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you for your very, very excellent questions. Thank you to Sandia and DOE for being here. Rick Sheehan, I don't know if he ran away already, but and to my staff, thank you very much. But if you happen to have any other questions, comments, concerns, we are here and always willing to help and provide information and hopefully presentations at any future events that you would like. So thank you very much for your time tonight. Good night.